Is financial debt destroying your marriage? Our guest tonight can help you get your finances and your marriage back on track. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome to Living a Godly Marriage. My name is Voncille Greene and I'm here with my darling husband and co-host, Melvin Greene. Our topic tonight is a flashpoint for many couples, and research reveals the #1 issue couples fight about in marriage and yet avoid discussing is money. It is also the second leading cause of divorce. Our guest tonight, Andrea Jackson, is here to help us sort it all out. She wears many hats, but prefers to be called a money coach. She's a dynamic speaker and a financial whiz. Welcome to the show, Andrea.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So let's get into it because we have a lot to cover.
Okay.
Can you tell us, how did you get into helping in the business of helping people get out of debt?
Okay, well, strangely enough, it wasn't something that I thought I was going to pursue. I always tell people I actually wanted to work on Sesame Street, or I wanted to be an astronaut, neither one of which worked out. And so what happened, though, coming out of high school, I immediately started to get into debt. Just like a lot of people, I wasn't educated about money. Anything and everything you could think of that happened to do with money, I went through. The foreclosure, the bankruptcy, the repo, everything, bad credit. And so someone actually blessed me. They came to me and they explained some very basic principles about money. Principles that I hadn't gotten taught. I wasn't taught in high school. I wasn't taught in college. I wasn't taught around a kitchen table. And so what happened is, just coming out of, being a teen and going into adulthood, I had no concept of money whatsoever. And so someone helped me, like I said, and because of that, and it totally changed my life, I wanted to be able to give back to other people the same way in which I was blessed to be able to bless others with some very basic, simple knowledge that changed my whole entire life. So that's, when I look at it, it's been 17 years, but that's how it got started.
Oh, 17 years. So you've been a financial coach or a money coach.
Yes,
now, what's the difference between a money coach and a financial
The word.
advisor?
Just the word. It's just the word. If you wanted to say financial coach or money coach, at the end of the day, I show people how to make, save, and accumulate money. And so how to make their money work for them.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I've been doing it for 17 years. It's so weird to say, but yes.
Wow.
I know, 12. So.
Well, why do you think finances is one of the leading causes of divorce with couples?
So I feel like finances is a byproduct. The challenge is communication. And so very rarely do I see someone who gets a divorce just because of the money. It's because they can't communicate about the money. But they also can't communicate about anything. That's just something else they can't communicate about. And also you often have to factor in that they come from their own spaces. So I know two become one, but two were raised by two different households, two different environments, two different families. How they approach money can be different. And so now when they become one, it becomes a source of contention sometimes because they don't discuss how they approach money and how they see money. And so it can fail.
Yeah, in fact, it's not unusual to have a couple. One's a saver and the other's a spender.
Absolutely.
And so they come together and there's initially conflict. The spender wants to buy something, the saver, no, we have to hold on to our money.
Absolutely.
So what do you find are the biggest challenges that couples face regarding money?
It's kind of what you just said. You have spenders and savers. So you'll have somebody that just wants to save. They want to save their money and they're very focused on saving. And then you have someone who's accumulating debt. And so it becomes, literally, it becomes a problem. And so from the standpoint, again, when you get past the communication piece, it's the destruction of the foundation of the household. Because you have this one person that's trying to save money, but then the other person is spending all the money that's saved, then it's just like a vicious cycle, and the circle just continues. And so one of the things that I try to explain to people, if I come across a household that they have these challenges, if you can we have to first establish what the goal is. And so no matter what else is going on, if we can keep the goal in front of us, then we may have different ways in which we want to get to the goal, but the purpose is to get to the goal. So first we have to establish whatever that goal is in order for them to be okay.
Well, let me ask you a question that a lot of couples face, and that is bringing their finances together. Do you think a husband and wife should combine and bring their finances together?
Well, okay, so we're talking about a godly marriage. So under the covenant of God, two did become one. So in an idealistic society, yes, I feel like people should be able to blend their finances together. There should be nothing hidden. It should be very transparent. Unfortunately, I can remember being told, I won't say by who, but just being told that you should always keep a stash. So as a female, you should always have a stash. But it's these little things that are told that can tear a household apart. So I do feel like money should be able to come together, and then the household bill should get paid out of one pot. But what I do understand after doing this for so long is that can be difficult at times. When you have blended families, you have second and third marriages, you have, tax issues that had nothing to do with the other person. So you have all these different things that weren't necessarily an issue 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, especially the blended families. That's huge. And so when you have two people that come together, but you have two separate households outside of those two people, that money is, is being put in, then it's kind of hard to pull the finances together. But, the answer to your question is ideally, yes. Realistically, it doesn't always happen that way.
So,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, does the issue of prenuptial agreements come up? Do you
Ooh. I know. This is where we differ for me. Now, coming from a financial space, I'm a firm believer in a prenuptial agreement. But I'm a firm believer in a prenuptial agreement because it's a financial instrument. Now, from an emotional space, people will say, especially in our community, in the African-American community, you don't trust me. And so my thing is, you don't trust the other person, because if you can think about it either which way. I don't think we are going to get divorced. But if it happens, then, the assets that I came with, I'm leaving with. Now, you could go in and say, well, you think we are going to get divorced. Well, whichever which way. The assets you came with, you should be able to leave with. And so I just feel like from a financial space, I had a couple, and we talked about that. And my thing with them was, that man was coming to that relationship with almost 10 times more in his investments than she had. And so I just felt like put a year on it. I said, y'all maintain 10 years, then everything is just community property. But if anything happens before those 10 years, then he leaves with what he came with. And I just feel like if we can take the emotion out of prenuptials and see it as what it is, because people don't say that about a will. And that's it. So, yeah.
And you also raised the point about blended families. And frankly, we're at a point in this country now where most marriages are blended. That is, they're one or more kids from a previous relationship.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those kids are adults. And like you said, the parent, the biological parent, may have savings, college funds, all that for those kids already set up. And now they're getting married, and the partner may say, hey, wait a minute, aren't we trying to buy a house? Or, and so I can see where these conflicts come in.
You also have, something called the sandwich generation. So you have people who are in situations where they're taking care of their parents as well. So you get married, and this, you have one spouse, and they're responsible for their parents. And then you have children that come into the picture. But this is what I mean by communication. All this needs to be discussed before you get to the altar. Before you even ask somebody to marry you, you need to make sure that you are on the same page with how we're going to, what are we going to do in our future with our money? That's a conversation that should happen way before I do. So.
Yes.
And Mel mentioned college fund.
Yes.
And so can you talk about that a little bit? You know,
Okay.
what would you recommend a couple do to save money for their children who might be
Well,
going to college?
one of the things that I see all the time, especially in this area, because we have a lot of government workers, I have an enormous amount of government clients. And so the thing is, people spend their life trying to get their income to a certain level. So they're striving to get to that 6 figures. What people don't realize is the minute you hit 125,000, those scholarships that you swear that your child is going to get, because everyone thinks their child is a genius, and so my child will get a scholarship. Well, your child cannot get the scholarship that you think they're going to get once your income gets over 125,000, because most scholarships are income-based. And so for them, you are out of the income as far as they're concerned. You make enough money to pay for college. So what I always tell people is, why not be prepared? You can set up an education fund for your child with as little as $50. I help people, you start where you start. And then we talk about how you can get better. But there's so many opportunities to be able to save for your child's education. If it happens that they get 18, 19 years old or whatever, and they have all these scholarships that are available to them, and they don't have, they don't need to use that money, you can give it to another child. Or you could just take that little hit and you can give them a down payment on a house. There's so many other things that you could do with it, but to not prepare, to me, is irresponsible. And to hope that your child get a scholarship is very irresponsible, in my opinion. So.
Okay. So we're going to take a break here.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll continue talking about godly ways a couple can manage their finances. Okay. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I moved to Florida with literally pennies in my pocket and a prayer. I needed a new start. Dacian looks like a very typical 3-year-old until you ask him, "What's your name? How old are you?" My son has a lot of behaviors that would show as being autistic. Most kids can tolerate a variety of foods, but unfortunately for Dacian, everything has to be organic and raw. I wasn't ashamed to go to the food pantries. It's expensive to eat healthy, and nutrition is very important to Dacian's health. The healthy, organic food that we receive dramatically helped his social skills. Most people would say, she really doesn't have much of a life. But to me, I have everything right there next to me and my son.
Welcome back to Living a Godly Marriage. We have been talking with our guest, Andrea Jackson, who is a money coach. So, Andrea, let's continue our discussion. So how important is it for a couple to sit down and make a budget for the family?
Oh, my goodness. Really, I think that, again, some of these things should be discussed before I do. But I think it's just so important to sit down and decide, what are we going to do with our monies? How are we going to spend our monies? And this, again, going back to how do we even approach it? One person may feel like, from a priority standpoint, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, that tithing and giving is a priority, where another person may feel like it's not a priority at all. And so, but when you're looking at a budget, there's other things like, how much are we going to spend for food? How much do we actually want to sit down and say, this is how much we set aside for entertainment? Going back to, the different personalities, how much are we going to set aside for savings? And so, yes, a budget is very important. Nobody likes it. I do a class called the Dirty B Word. But I feel like, so I started calling budgeting, I started calling it, money accumulation program, because they like that. They like, people like the whole notion of accumulation of wealth. So when you start talking about money, but to accumulate wealth, you must budget money. So it's just really that you're playing with the words, but it's extremely important.
Yeah. I know before Mel and I got married, I was not the best money manager. And I didn't have any credit card debt, but I did have one big debt that I felt that I needed to disclose to him. So how important is that when a couple is talking about getting married, that they disclose financial debt that they may be bringing into the marriage?
Everything is extremely important, but one of the things that may step on some people's toes, I think that we've gotten away as a community. A marriage is a business arrangement, so to speak. It's not. We've made it this emotional thing, not to say that emotions don't play a part. But when you get away from the part, when you go back in history, you have to come with a dowry. Why? Because it was a business transaction.
Right.
And so therefore, if it's a business transaction and we're creating a wealth, we're creating this family, we're creating a legacy, we're creating generational just things, then we should come to the table transparent. I have this, I have that, or whatever. How can we work together as a couple to get rid of it so that we advance our family as a whole unit? But if we're not willing, just think about that. If I'm not willing to tell you, let's just say in the sake of this conversation, it's IRS debt. I'm not willing to tell you that I owe the IRS $10,000, but somehow I'm supposed to open up the rest, that's...
Right. Or I have a student loan of $25,000.
Exactly.
Well, you didn't tell me that. Well, you never asked me. That's why I never told you. I mean, let's be real. And that's what people will do. And that's why, till death to us part.
No, Melvin. It says, right, keep out of debt and owe no man anything. Amen. Romans 13:8.
But I just want to go back to something you said. Marriage is a business, and it's a covenant for us.
Amen.
And so you don't mean business that's a contract that you can get out of whenever. I just want to be clear on that one
very clear.
thing.
No, I do not mean that you guys are you have a boardroom meeting. But I do feel like if it's approached in the manner in which, think about how, if you have somebody, I don't know, think of anybody who has a business like my business. I put time and care and attention into that, into building relationships, into how I manage my business and everything that I do with my business. If you put the same time and care and attention into the partnership that you have with your spouse, it will be successful. And so even if you think about it from the standpoint of how much time and attention someone puts into their job or their work, but putting that same time and attention absolutely into that partnership.
And the time and attention also goes into laying that foundation. I heard you mention earlier about tithes and offerings. Let's talk about that. Is that really a key in managing your finances?
For me, it's a super key. I was not brought up in a household that tithe. It's not something that we even discussed. And so just growing up Catholic and moving from that space to Baptist, I didn't even know what the tithe was. I didn't find out till I was probably in my early 30s. But when I realized that there's principles that God sets forth. See, to me, when I read the Word of God, it's a very simple thing. He says, you do this and I'll do that. And you can take it any way you want to. Now, I know without a shadow of a doubt, God does not need my money to accomplish anything. It's just a matter of obedience. But if I can't, He gives me 100% of everything. If I can't give Him back 10, and He just wants to keep 90, it's a heart condition. And so even when I teach a class, I don't go hard in on about tithing because it's a heart condition. If you have a challenge giving up 10 of 100,
and yet you'll give more to a department store
Macy's
or
asks for $29.99, and you pay it on time every month. But God is your source. He's your all in all. He wakes you every day. You can't give it. You just can't be obedient to the 10th.
Right.
So I do believe that it's a foundational space and that it will cover a household. I believe in a covering. And so I believe that a tithe will cover your household.
And that's something Voncille and I talked about before we got married. And we said, yes, we will give our tithes and offerings to the church because that's what the Lord wants us to do. In fact, He says in Malachi 3, verses 8 through 10, will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are you robbing? How are we robbing you? In tithes and offers. And He says, you are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And He says, test me on this. It's rare, if ever, God says, test me or prove me. In other words, if we're faithful and obedient to tithing and offering, He's going to bless us. And He says, I will throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. That's Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. And that's our testimony. God has really blessed us because we give tithes and offerings. So that's a foundational principle.
Amen.
What about overspending? You find couples tend to do that?
Well, people, not just couples. So the average adult wastes $200 a month. And so in my world, that's not even disputable. Like, somebody will try to sell me on, oh, I don't waste any money. Oh, yes, you do. So whether it's on cable, and the reason why I say cable is a waste, because most people have, 500 channels that they're not watching. And so if they really sit down and look at what am I watching, that's a whole nother business. But the money that's being wasted on food is the #1 entity that I feel like people waste. We are the healthiest nation in America, in the world. And you can tell by our waistlines. And so I tell everybody, Friday night is International Eat Out Night. It doesn't matter with your race, your culture, your creed. Everybody seems to want to eat pizza on Friday night. Don't understand why, but it is what it is. But when you look at Uber Eats and you look at, Postmates and all these different ways for people to be able to eat, people also aren't tracking that. And what else could I be doing with that money? How could I be making that money work for me and not work for my waistline?
Can you talk about wants versus needs?
That's some kindergarten stuff. From the standpoint of, you learn in kindergarten. There's a difference between what you want and what you need. And so having that battle, because, really, I remember one time this person saying to me that they're a younger person, but they said that a cell phone was a basic need. Really? So that begs the position that there is no other way to communicate unless you have a cell phone, because a need is something that you can't do without. And so when you're looking at the needs that we have to, we should have shelter. And it should be a decent shelter, but understanding, we should have food. There's some health care. It's certain things that we need to have, but then there's some things that we want. See, we should have transportation. We should, but there's also public transportation. So we may want to have a BMW, but our pockets may need to have a Sonata. I don't know. Metro, It may need to have a Metro Pass. But really looking at and balancing that thing out. And there's also something, if you guys can remember years ago, there was a candy called Now or Laters.
Yes.
So Now or Laters actually still exist. But even when I sit with couples, I say some things are now and some things are later.
That's
some of those needs, some of those things you want, that's a later thing.
That's
Their needs are a now thing. And so what are things that we need to be accomplishing now?
Yeah, and one thing couples need, I want you to talk about, is an emergency account.
Yes.
Emergency fund. Why is that needed?
Well, one thing I do know is 2 things that I can't control: the day I'm going to die and an emergency. And so emergencies happen. But the question is, are you prepared for those emergencies? When you think about what do people do if I'm not prepared, how do I handle emergencies? Well, I go to credit cards. I create debt. And so by having 3 to 6 months of my expenses in an account, earning interest, by the way, then, I talk to people, if the money's going to sit there, it should earn some interest while it's sitting there. But you have that emergency account in place, so if an emergency pops up, I have cash to go get to, and I have money. When, honestly, statistically, there are so many people in this country that can't get their hands on $1,000, and that's ridiculous for the amount of money that's being made here. So.
Yeah, that's really something. I wanted to mention, too, being a fellow member of Reed Temple, we know our pastor, Pastor Mark Whitlock, has been having a Bible study called Debt Free for Thee. And he's been emphasizing and teaching about coming out of debt, because that can save a lot of money. And we were so blessed to have a credit card cutting ceremony. And it was very powerful and very moving to see that. And I'm glad he's also have you teaching us, and you certainly have helped Voncille and I. We really appreciate that. But one other question, how do you save money for college? Can you tell us that real quick?
So outside of the education plans, so you have the education plans to be able to save money for college. So but there's more than one. Most people are very familiar with the 529 plan, but there's also something called a Coverdell plan. And so just knowing what is a situation, it's like there's different situations that beg different answers. It just really depends on how. You can even, in some instances, take money out of your retirement, a one-time withdrawal for a child's education. So it really depends on the child and where you are in that space in a couple.
Okay, when you say that one-time withdrawal, is there a tax implication associated with it? Okay.
So it's a $10,000 one-time withdrawal that you can use for education, and so it comes out of a Roth that's tax-free.
Okay.
Yes, and so, but that's useful, because one of the challenges I hear people say is, well, what if my child doesn't want to go to school? What if they don't want to go to college? You know, and I've set up this education plan for them to go to college, but they don't want to go. Well, if it comes out of your retirement, then if they don't go, then it stays in your retirement. So you get to accomplish kill two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Yeah, now Mel mentioned that you're doing the debt-free for Reed Temple, but you also had the Faith and Finance.
Yes.
Now, is that open to anyone who would want to come?
Actually, it is. And so it's not a Reed Temple thing. So anybody who wants to come, the classes will start up again at the end of this month. So we run on Monday nights. We go from 7 to 8:30. And so basically it's the foundational principles of how God sees money and how we are supposed to be stewards. And so even when we were talking about tithing, when you look at that scripture, it never mentions money. We put money in it. He never mentions money. We are supposed to tithe our time, our treasures, and our talents. But we as a people put money on it. Even when he says, I will pour you out a blessing, he doesn't say, I will pour you out $1 million.
That's right.
But we put money on it. And so in that space, in the class, we really do. We delve into the different concepts of money, things that just wasn't taught. And the reason why I know it's not taught, because 95% of the people in this country retire broke. And so if money was taught, then that wouldn't be the case. And so when you look at the amount of debt that people carry and why they carry it, the amount of people who take out loans out of their 401ks, these things happen for lack of education. Word of God says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So in our Faith and Finance ministry, our focus is to create a space where we can have conversation about money. And we teach just the principles of how to build a strong financial house.
Well, we're just blessed that you've been able to just teach us in these past few minutes. And just want to recap a couple of very important points. We said the foundation of the finances is giving your tithes and offerings to God. We talked about the importance of having an emergency account because, the transmission could break down, appliance could break down in the house, and you need that. We also discussed the importance of budgeting, coming together, working together as one, managing the debt. Someone has said the difference between men and boys are the price of their toys. So
that's good.
You got your spender and your saver, but you got to work together. And also saving for retirement and saving for education.
So that time went really quickly. As we bring our show to a close, you can contact Andrea Jackson on 410-424-2100. That's 410-424-2100.
And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you want us to cover in future shows, email us at livingagodlymarriage@gmail.com, or you can call us on 301-327-4339. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for watching. And remember, living a godly marriage is the best marriage.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Great job.
Did you enunciate?
Alexa. See?
Nothing.
What's Alexa's energy level?
She's got plenty of juice.
Could Alexa be in sleep mode? Could Alexa have a communication disorder?
Kids don't come with a manual. Learn the signs of communication disorders and find the professionals who can help.